James the Raven McAllister ruled Scotland's underworld with an iron fist, his drug empire spreading like wildfire through the heart of the country. For years, Detective Sarah Collins and her team chased shadows, struggling to gather the evidence that could finally bring him down. But when a low-level courier turned informant, everything changed, setting off a high-stakes game of cat and mouse that would expose betrayal, danger, and the true cost of justice. In the heart of Scotland, far from the bustling cities and historic castles, a shadowy empire quietly thrived. This empire wasn't built on gold or ancient artifacts. It was built on something far more dangerous and destructive: drugs. For years, the man behind this empire, known only by the chilling nickname the Raven, ruled with an iron fist. He controlled an intricate and ruthless network that spread across towns and cities, feeding addiction and violence wherever his influence reached. The Raven was no ordinary criminal. Unlike other drug dealers who operated on the street corners or in rundown back alleys, he ran a sophisticated operation that seemed impossible to touch. His organization was well-structured, almost like a business, with clear roles and a chain of command that kept the police frustrated. He was always one step ahead, and his reach extended so far that many believed he had people inside the police force, government, and local businesses working for him. People whispered about him in fear and awe. His name was rarely spoken aloud in public, as if saying it would summon danger. The drugs flooding the streets were traced back to him, but no one could catch him or even get close enough to prove his involvement. The communities he impacted were caught in a web of addiction, violence, and silence. Families were torn apart, but the Raven's presence was like a ghost, felt but unseen. The police faced enormous challenges. Every investigation led to dead ends or suspicious leaks. Surveillance footage showed blurry images, and witnesses were too afraid to come forward. The Raven's network was built on loyalty and fear, and betrayal meant severe consequences. Over time, officers assigned to the case became exhausted, some even questioning if justice was possible. Despite the setbacks, the police never gave up. They knew that if the Raven wasn't stopped, the damage to Scotland's communities would only grow worse. But with so little evidence, the case seemed impossible. The man who controlled this empire remained an enigma, his identity shrouded in mystery. Every day that passed was another day. The Raven's drugs reached new victims, and every failure deepened the frustration of those sworn to protect. This was the world the police faced, a ruthless drug lord with a seemingly untouchable empire, operating in the heart of Scotland. A war was quietly being waged, a battle between law enforcement's determination and a criminal mastermind's cunning. And no one yet knew just how close they were to breaking through the silence that had protected the Raven for so long. For years the police worked tirelessly to bring down the Raven's empire, but their efforts were met with frustration and disappointment. The investigation stretched on, weaving through countless dead ends and false leads. Each attempt to dismantle the network seemed to vanish before it could gain momentum, leaving officers feeling powerless against an enemy who always seemed just out of reach. The more they dug, the more the case seemed to slip through their fingers. The drug ring was unlike any the police had seen before. It was carefully organized, with layers of protection that shielded its leaders from exposure. Low-level dealers and couriers were easily replaced or discarded, and those who worked higher up were fiercely loyal or deeply afraid to betray the operation. Even the informants who did come forward rarely had enough information to make a real difference. The Raven's network had mastered the art of secrecy, and that made the police's job almost impossible. Surveillance operations were costly and time-consuming, often yielding only fragments of information. Officers watched countless hours of video footage, tracking suspected couriers as they moved through streets and alleys, but the trail often ended abruptly. Vehicles would disappear into underground parking garages, packages changed hands in quick exchanges, and communication was kept to a minimum. Technology was used to encrypt messages, making wiretaps ineffective. Every piece of evidence seemed to slip away like smoke. The communities affected by the drug trade grew increasingly desperate. Crime rates soared, and violence became more common. Families lived in fear, and children were caught in the crossfire. Despite these urgent cries for help, the police were limited in what they could do without solid proof. Arrests of low-level offenders did little to weaken the core of the organization. It was a frustrating cycle. Those arrested were quickly replaced by others, and the drugs kept flowing. The officers working on the case faced intense pressure, both from the public and within their own ranks. Some questioned if the law was powerful enough to stop such a deeply entrenched criminal network. The longer the case dragged on, the more the sense of hopelessness grew. However, the team remained determined to find a way in, believing that every empire, no matter how strong, has its weaknesses. Amid the long nights and dead-end investigations, the police held on to a faint hope. They knew that if they could uncover even a small piece of the puzzle, it might lead them closer to the Raven. The struggle was far from over, but they were ready to keep pushing, waiting for the moment when the Empire's defenses would finally crack. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, and from the most unlikely of sources, a young low-level courier caught during a routine police stop. Up until that moment, this courier was just another small cog in a much larger machine, barely known beyond his immediate circle. He had no idea that his arrest would mark the beginning of a turning point in the investigation. The police saw something different in him, a chance to finally gather the information they desperately needed. At first, the courier appeared reluctant. He was caught in a dangerous game and knew the risks of talking to the police. Yet, facing serious charges and the harsh reality of prison, he made a decision that would change everything. He agreed to cooperate. This decision sent ripples through the investigation. What started as a small lead began to open doors that had long been sealed shut. The courier's knowledge was limited but valuable. He knew routes, drop-off points, and some of the faces involved in the daily operations. More importantly, he provided insight into the hierarchy of the drug ring, naming mid-level figures who had so far flown under the radar. This information was like a key that unlocked parts of the network that had been hidden in plain sight. Using the courier's details, the police began to connect dots they hadn't been able to link before. They identified stash houses that were previously unknown and uncovered secret communication methods. The courier's testimony also revealed how shipments moved through Scotland, highlighting the precision and planning involved in maintaining the flow of drugs. The operation grew more complex as the police realized the sheer size of the network. The courier's cooperation led to surveillance on key targets, phone taps, and undercover stings that brought even more information to light. Suddenly, what had once seemed like a tangled web started to take shape as a clear and organized structure. For the officers, this was a moment of cautious optimism. They knew the risks involved. Informants like the courier were vulnerable, and their safety had to be a priority. But without his help, the entire case might have remained a frustrating mystery. His cooperation gave the police the edge they needed to push forward. As the investigation expanded, the police prepared to take on the drug ring on a new level. The small lead from one low-level courier was now the foundation of a much larger, far-reaching operation. The path ahead was dangerous and uncertain, but the police were closer than ever to bringing the Raven and his empire into the light. With the courier's information in hand, the police began to piece together the vast and intricate web of the Raven's drug empire. What had once been a shadowy network operating in fragments suddenly started to take form as a sprawling operation, stretching far beyond what anyone had imagined. Every new detail the courier provided was a thread that connected to others, revealing a tightly controlled system built for efficiency and secrecy. Officers worked around the clock, analyzing data, following up on tips, and conducting surveillance on locations mentioned by the courier. They identified numerous stash houses scattered across urban neighborhoods and rural areas alike, places where drugs were stored, packaged, and distributed. Some were cleverly disguised as legitimate businesses, while others were hidden in abandoned buildings or behind false walls. Beyond the physical locations, the police uncovered a sophisticated communication network. The Raven's organization used encrypted phones, coded messages, and trusted intermediaries to relay orders and coordinate shipments. This level of organization showed a criminal operation that was more than just street dealers. It was a well-oiled machine operating like a corporate enterprise. The courier also revealed key players within the hierarchy. Mid-level lieutenants, trusted enforcers, and financial handlers came into focus, each with specific roles in keeping the empire running. These individuals were the gears in the machine, managing day-to-day operations and ensuring the flow of drugs continued uninterrupted. Identifying them was crucial, as dismantling the network meant targeting more than just the kingpin. The police were struck by the scale of the operation. Drug shipments moved in and out with precision, using vehicles that avoided detection and routes designed to stay ahead of law enforcement. Money laundering schemes were also uncovered, showing how profits were hidden and reinvested to expand the empire. This financial trail was as important as the drugs themselves, providing evidence that tied the operation together. The more the police learned, the clearer it became that the Ravens' influence touched many parts of society. There were connections to local businesses, corrupt officials, and even some within law enforcement, all of which complicated the investigation. These revelations raised the stakes and demanded even greater caution and strategy from the officers. With each new discovery, the police built a detailed map of the empire's structure. This growing knowledge allowed them to plan targeted operations rather than random raids, increasing the chances of hitting the network where it hurt most. The investigation had moved from guesswork to a focused assault, fueled by the courier's unexpected but invaluable insight. As the police prepared to take the next step, they knew the path ahead would be dangerous and complicated. But for the first time in years, they felt a real chance at breaking the Ravens' grip on Scotland's streets. The empire that once seemed untouchable was finally within reach. To gather the solid evidence they desperately needed, the police knew they had to go deeper into the Ravens' world. Surveillance and informants could only get them so far. To truly expose the drug ring's inner workings, officers had to risk everything by going undercover. It was a dangerous gamble, but one they believed was essential to dismantling the empire once and for all. Undercover officers assumed new identities, blending into the shadowy corners of Scotland's drug scene. They posed as buyers, dealers, or middlemen looking to climb the ranks. Their mission was to earn the trust of key players in the network and gather first-hand proof of illegal activities. This meant long hours of secret meetings, hidden cameras, and constant vigilance. Every moment was a test. Any slip-up could blow their cover and put their lives at risk. The police carefully selected their best agents for these assignments, understanding that the stakes were high. These officers had to navigate a world filled with suspicion and danger, where loyalty was everything, and betrayal meant brutal consequences. It was a tense balancing act. They had to gain trust without crossing ethical lines or becoming entangled in the very crimes they sought to stop. As the undercover operation unfolded, officers began to witness the scale and sophistication of the Ravens' operation firsthand. They saw how shipments were negotiated and moved with precision, how money was exchanged in secret locations, and how communications were carefully coded. Each piece of evidence collected helped build the case, transforming vague suspicions into undeniable proof. The undercover work also revealed unexpected details about the people running the drug ring. Some were cold and ruthless, while others showed a strange loyalty to the organization despite the risks. The officers observed how the network kept its members in line through fear, rewards, and a strict chain of command. Understanding these dynamics was key to anticipating moves and planning arrests. However, the danger was constant. Undercover officers faced threats from rival gangs, violent enforcers, and the ever-present risk of being discovered by the Ravens' men. They worked in isolation, often unable to share their fears or the full scope of what they were experiencing with their colleagues. The emotional toll was immense, but their commitment never wavered. Despite the risks, the undercover operation became a turning point. Understanding these dynamics was key to anticipating moves and planning arrests. However, the danger was constant. Undercover officers faced threats from rival gangs, violent enforcers, and the ever-present risk of being discovered by the Ravens' men. They worked in isolation, often unable to share their fears or the full scope of what they were experiencing with their colleagues. The emotional toll was immense, but their commitment never wavered. Despite the risks, the undercover operation became a turning point. The evidence gathered during this time was crucial in tying the drug ring to the Raven himself. It showed not only the flow of drugs and money but also the brutal methods used to maintain control. The police had finally moved beyond speculation. They had proof that could stand up in court. With this new level of understanding and evidence, the police prepared for the next phase of their operation. They were closer than ever to breaking the empire, but they knew the hardest battles were still ahead. Just when the police believed their operation was gaining unstoppable momentum, a devastating betrayal threatened to unravel everything they had worked so hard to achieve. Deep within the force itself, an officer secretly loyal to the Raven had been feeding information to the drug lord's network. This betrayal was a blow not only to the investigation but also to the trust and morale of the entire team. The discovery came as a shock. Months of painstaking undercover work and careful surveillance had been compromised, with key details mysteriously leaking to the Raven's associates. Suspicions had been growing quietly for a while, but confirming the betrayal required evidence strong enough to expose a mole within the police ranks. When the truth finally surfaced, it sent shockwaves through the department. The officer involved had access to sensitive information about the investigation's progress, including the identities of undercover operatives and upcoming raid plans. This insider knowledge allowed the Raven's network to stay one step ahead, altering their movements and avoiding capture. The police realized that despite their careful planning, their efforts had been repeatedly undermined from within. The betrayal complicated the investigation in ways no one had anticipated. Officers had to rethink their entire approach, questioning every piece of intelligence and every decision made. Trust, a vital element in such a high-stakes operation, was shattered. The team faced the daunting task of identifying how deep the corruption went and whether more officers might be compromised. For the police, the stakes were higher than ever. They had to protect their undercover agents who were now at greater risk of exposure, while simultaneously continuing the investigation without giving away their new knowledge of the mole. The pressure was immense, with time running out and the Raven's empire growing increasingly alert. The department launched an internal inquiry to root out any additional corruption, working carefully to avoid tipping off suspects. This process slowed the investigation, but it was necessary to restore integrity and protect the operation. Meanwhile, the officers on the front lines had to operate with heightened caution, aware that their own ranks might harbor enemies. Despite the setback, the betrayal strengthened the resolve of the remaining team members. They were determined not to let one corrupt individual derail years of hard work and the hopes of the community. The situation underscored the dangerous complexities of fighting crime that had infiltrated even the institutions meant to stop it. The police knew the road ahead would be more difficult, with danger coming not just from the Raven's network, but also from within. But they refused to back down. The fight to bring down the drug lord had entered a new and perilous phase, one that demanded even greater courage, loyalty, and determination. With the shocking betrayal uncovered, the police found themselves in a race against time. The Raven and his network had been warned, and the entire operation was on high alert. The careful balance the officers had maintained for months was suddenly fragile, and every move risked alerting the drug ring to their next steps. The pressure to act quickly mounted as the window to capture the kingpin and dismantle his empire began to close. The police knew that the Raven's organization would try to cover their tracks, move shipments faster, and warn key members to disappear. In response, law enforcement coordinated a series of complex, simultaneous raids across Scotland. The goal was to strike so quickly and broadly that the drug ring would have no chance to react. These operations targeted multiple locations, from stash houses in city neighborhoods to rural warehouses and safe houses scattered in remote areas. Planning these raids required careful coordination. Officers from various departments and units worked together, sharing intelligence and resources to maximize the impact. Timing was critical. If any part of the operation leaked or started late, suspects could escape or destroy evidence. The stakes were high, and failure was not an option. On the day of the raids, tension ran high. Teams moved swiftly and silently, storming locations with precision and determination. Armed resistance was expected, and in some places it came, but the police pressed forward, focused on their mission to bring down the network once and for all. The raids were chaotic and dangerous, with moments of close calls and split-second decisions. As officers secured each location, they uncovered vast quantities of drugs, weapons, and cash. They found detailed records and documents linking members of the network to various illegal activities. The evidence painted a clear picture of the Raven's vast empire and the corruption that helped sustain it. The simultaneous raids also led to the arrest of several high-ranking members of the organization. These arrests were crucial. They disrupted the command structure and sent a message that the police were closing in. But despite the significant blows, the Raven himself remained elusive, slipping away from the final raids. The operation had dealt a serious setback to the drug empire, but the fight was far from over. Police knew the Raven would not give up easily, and that the network might regroup or retaliate. The urgency to capture the kingpin grew stronger. In the aftermath, the police reviewed every detail, preparing for the next phase of their pursuit. The raids had revealed much, but the ultimate goal, bringing the Raven to justice, still lay ahead. The race against time continued, with danger closing in from every side. The final confrontation came unexpectedly but with overwhelming force. After months of gathering intelligence, following leads, and striking at the network's many branches, police had tracked the Raven to a remote warehouse on the outskirts of a small Scottish town. This location was believed to be the Kingpin's last stronghold, a place where the drugs, weapons, and profits converged under his direct control. The officers prepared for what could be the most dangerous raid of the entire operation. Approaching the warehouse was tense. The area was isolated, surrounded by thick woods and hidden from view by high fences and security cameras. The police knew they were walking into a fortified position where the Raven's men were likely armed and ready to fight. Yet there was no turning back. After years of struggle and sacrifice, this was the moment to end the reign of terror once and for all. Teams moved in swiftly and silently, coordinating their entry to surprise the occupants. As the officers breached the doors, they were met with fierce resistance. Gunfire echoed through the building, and officers had to take cover while returning fire. The raid quickly turned into a high-stakes battle, with every step forward won through determination and courage. Inside the warehouse, the police discovered more than just drugs and weapons. There were detailed ledgers and digital files that mapped out the entire drug empire, showing shipments, payments, and contacts, including corrupt officials who had been secretly aiding the Raven. This evidence was crucial, exposing not only the criminal activities but also the extent of the network's influence. Despite the chaos, the officers pressed on, clearing room after room. They found hidden compartments filled with cash, drugs ready for distribution, and communication devices used to coordinate with dealers across the country. The scale of the operation was staggering, and it was clear that this warehouse was the nerve center of the empire. Though the Raven himself was not immediately captured in the raid, the evidence seized dealt a crippling blow to his operation. The intelligence gathered gave the police the information needed to track him down quickly. The raid also led to the arrest of several top lieutenants, further dismantling the network's leadership. The success of this operation was a turning point. It proved that the drug empire, once believed untouchable, could be broken. The evidence uncovered not only strengthened the case against the Raven but also exposed the corruption that had allowed him to operate with impunity for so long. As the dust settled, the police prepared for the final pursuit. The warehouse raid had shifted the balance of power, but the ultimate capture of the Raven was still to come. The fight was far from over, but hope was alive. For the first time, the Empire's downfall seemed inevitable. The arrest of the Raven sent shockwaves through Scotland's criminal underworld and law enforcement alike. After years of relentless investigation, undercover work, and high-risk operations, the man who had controlled one of the most powerful drug empires was finally behind bars. His capture was the result of tireless efforts from police officers who had faced danger, betrayal, and frustration along the way. The trial that followed was one of the most significant in recent Scottish history. The evidence gathered over years from undercover recordings, seized documents, witness testimonies, and financial records painted a damning picture of the Raven's criminal enterprise. Prosecutors presented the overwhelming proof of his involvement in drug trafficking, money laundering, and violent crimes. The scale of his operation stunned the court and the public, revealing a network far more extensive than many had realized. Beyond the Raven himself, the trial also exposed the inner workings of his organization. Several of his top lieutenants and enforcers faced charges, and their testimonies helped fill in gaps about how the empire operated on a daily basis. The transparency brought by the court process was crucial in understanding the full impact of the drug ring on communities across Scotland. However, the trial also brought to light a darker side of the investigation, the corruption within the police force. Evidence showed that some officers had been compromised, tipping off the Raven and protecting parts of the network. This revelation shook public confidence in law enforcement and forced the department to confront uncomfortable truths. An independent inquiry was launched to investigate the corruption, resulting in disciplinary actions and reforms aimed at preventing similar betrayals in the future. Despite these challenges, the justice system moved forward. The Raven and many of his associates were convicted, receiving lengthy prison sentences. The verdict was a victory not only for the police but for the communities ravaged by addiction and violence. It sent a clear message that no one was above the law, no matter how powerful or hidden. The aftermath of the case sparked wider conversations about the ongoing battle against drug trafficking and organized crime. Authorities recognized the need for stronger collaboration, improved surveillance technology, and better protection for undercover officers and informants. The lessons learned from this operation shaped future strategies, helping to build a more resilient and transparent police force. For the officers who had dedicated years to the case, the conviction was both a relief and a solemn reminder of the lives affected by the Ravens' empire. While justice had been served, the scars on the community would take time to heal. Still, the trial marked a turning point, a moment where courage and perseverance overcame fear and corruption, paving the way for a safer Scotland. The fall of the Ravens' empire was a victory, but it was also a beginning, a chance for Scotland to heal and rebuild after years of devastation caused by drugs and violence. The impact of the drug ring had been profound, affecting countless families, neighborhoods, and lives. As the dust settled, communities began the slow process of recovery, supported by renewed efforts from law enforcement and local organizations. In the wake of the case, the police department underwent significant changes. The betrayal that had threatened the investigation exposed weaknesses that had to be addressed. Internal reforms were implemented to strengthen oversight and prevent corruption, restoring trust within the force and the public. Training programs were expanded, focusing on ethics, community engagement, and the challenges of tackling organized crime. The success of the operation also highlighted the importance of cooperation between different agencies. Police forces, social services, and community groups began working more closely to address not just the supply of drugs but also the root causes of addiction and crime. Prevention and education programs received more attention, aiming to reduce demand and offer support to those struggling with substance abuse. Understanding these dynamics was key to anticipating moves and planning arrests. However, the danger was constant. Undercover officers faced threats from rival gangs, violent enforcers, and the ever-present risk of being discovered by the Ravens' men. They worked in isolation, often unable to share their fears or the full scope of what they were experiencing with their colleagues. The emotional toll was immense, but their commitment never wavered. Despite the risks, the undercover operation became a turning point. The evidence gathered during this time was crucial in tying the drug ring to the Raven himself. It showed not only the flow of drugs and money but also the brutal methods used to maintain control. The police had finally moved beyond speculation. They had proof that could stand up in court. With this new level of understanding and evidence, the police prepared for the next phase of their operation. They were closer than ever to breaking the empire, but they knew the hardest battles were still ahead. Just when the police believed their operation was gaining unstoppable momentum, a devastating betrayal threatened to unravel everything they had worked so hard to achieve. Deep within the force itself, an officer secretly loyal to the Raven had been feeding information to the drug lord's network. This betrayal was a blow not only to the investigation but also to the trust and morale of the entire team. The discovery came as a shock. Months of painstaking undercover work and careful surveillance had been compromised, with key details mysteriously leaking to the Raven's associates. Suspicions had been growing quietly for a while, but confirming the betrayal required evidence strong enough to expose a mole within the police ranks. When the truth finally surfaced, it sent shockwaves through the department. The officer involved had access to sensitive information about the investigation's progress, including the identities of undercover operatives and upcoming raid plans. This insider knowledge allowed the Ravens' network to stay one step ahead, altering their movements and avoiding capture. The police realized that despite their careful planning, their efforts had been repeatedly undermined from within. The betrayal complicated the investigation in ways no one had anticipated. Officers had to rethink their entire approach, questioning every piece of intelligence and every decision made. Trust, a vital element in such a high-stakes operation, was shattered. The team faced the daunting task of identifying how deep the corruption went and whether more officers might be compromised. For the police, the stakes were higher than ever. They had to protect their undercover agents who were now at greater risk of exposure, while simultaneously continuing the investigation without giving away their new knowledge of the mole. The pressure was immense. With time running out and the Raven's empire growing increasingly alert. The department launched an internal inquiry to root out any additional corruption, working carefully to avoid tipping off suspects. This process slowed the investigation, but it was necessary to restore integrity and protect the operation. Meanwhile, the officers on the front lines had to operate with heightened caution, aware that their own ranks might harbor enemies. Despite the setback, the betrayal strengthened the resolve of the remaining team members. They were determined not to let one corrupt individual derail years of hard work and the hopes of the community. The situation underscored the dangerous complexities of fighting crime that had infiltrated even the institutions meant to stop it. The police knew the road ahead would be more difficult, with danger coming not just from the Ravens network, but also from within. But they refused to back down. The fight to bring down the drug lord had entered a new and perilous phase, one that demanded even greater courage, loyalty, and determination. With the shocking betrayal uncovered, the police found themselves in a race against time. The Raven and his network had been warned, and the entire operation was on high